All right, so for my UNESCO World History Site presentation, I chose Vatican City. I also was in the early modern era from 1500 to 1798, which is basically the Renaissance time period. Um, so, kind of an overview and objectives of what we'll be talking about in this presentation. So, what is the Vatican? We'll go over what that is. I mean, a lot of you are older, you probably know what the Vatican is, or at least heard of it, or have seen it on social media or news. So, we'll kind of talk about what it is today, what it is back in this time period. The main connection I will be making to this time period, the early modern Renaissance era, is the art, because a lot of the art and major famous art pieces in the Vatican came about during this time period in the Renaissance. It was kind of a surge in artistic build up, I guess you could say, in the Vatican, especially for Christianity. Obviously, there's other pieces of art for other religions. Muslims, you have Mecca. China's has a lot of temples for Buddhism and Hinduism, but for Christianity and Catholics, the Vatican is kind of their spot. And then who Michelangelo was, if you know already, he's a very, very famous artist who still argued to this day is one of the greatest artists of all time. We're kind of going a little more about him as well. So the objectives for the presentation, students will know what the Vatican is and its importance. Students will be able to identify the most important and famous piece of art in the Vatican, and students will know who Michelangelo is. I kind of just told you, but we'll go into more detail about him. So what is the Vatican? Like I said, it's kind of the center. It's mostly kind of the capital of Catholicism, much in a way, kind of how Salt Lake City is for the LDS religion. Um, it is located in Italy. However, it is its own nation state. It's the smallest nation state in the world. It's only about 2 square miles big, with only about 800, a little over 800 residents, most of which are people of the Catholic Church, the head of the church. You have the Pope, the cardinals, the bishops. They all reside in Vatican City. But like I said, technically it is its own city-state with its own currency, post office, area code, and much like Nevada has its state flag, this is kind of the state flag for the Vatican. Colors are white and gold with the keys to the kingdom that Jesus gave Peter are on the flag. So you see that flag, that's kind of the Vatican city-state flag. So, just to be clear, Vatican City did exist before this time period, the early modern Renaissance time period. Just what you see now, this kind of the revamped big buildings art, wasn't done until the 16th century by Pope Sixtus the Fourth. He kind of, I guess you could say, revamped Vatican City. It was kind of controversial at the time because a lot of the church officials and people didn't want to mess with what they had there before, but he wanted to, and obviously paid off because it's one of the many beautiful religious sites in the world. And kind of the main connection I will make to the Renaissance time period, like I said, will be the art, and it holds some of the greatest pieces of art in the world, religious or not religious. Obviously, if you're religious, it's going to mean more to you, but even if you're not, people can still go and admire the beauty that Vatican City has to offer, which is art from the Renaissance time period over 500 years ago that people still love to go see today. Kind of one interesting fact that I got while doing research on this was um, St. Peter's Basilica, which we'll talk about later, is kind of the main building in Vatican City, and it's built over the tomb of St. Peter, who, as his name entails, was a Catholic saint. He was one of the 12 apostles, but one thing that none of my sources mentioned or that I could find was no sources ever said that he was the first pope. St. Peter the Rock, when he's called St. Peter the Rock, because on this rock you'll build my church, and these keys are what Jesus gave to Peter, keys to the kingdom. So it's kind of interesting to see that very few sources that I could find said that he was the first pope. They did of course mention he was a saint and he was one of the 12 apostles, but he was the first pope. So it is built on his tomb. So like I said, the Vatican art, it's home to many many famous paintings and sculptures. We'll talk about these three. The Sistine Chapel, Pieta, and St. Peter's Basilica are kind of the main three that not only you have probably seen in your lifetime, whether through pictures or visited there, but these three all have in common that Michelangelo either did or took part in making. So the first one is the Sistine Chapel. Obviously, as the name entails, is the chapel for St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. It has tons of these giant murals depicting biblical scenes. That's another thing I learned is these aren't just random paintings that Michelangelo drew. A lot of these are depicting events in the Bible, specifically Genesis. He drew a lot of inspiration from the creational stories. One thing that I found really interesting was the fact that this wasn't how it always has been. Beforehand, it was just painted blue with gold dots, depicted as stars, or what the gold dots kind of were there for. But due to repairs and the Pope wanting, I guess you could say, to revamp the chapel, he hired Michelangelo and a couple other artists, but Michelangelo the most notably, to do these giant murals that made it look so pretty. I've never seen it personally. I am going this summer. Really excited about it. But I have family members that have been there, and that it's just absolutely beautiful, and people just wander around there with their heads cranked all the way up. So definitely looking forward to being one of those people. The next one is the Pieta. I think I'm saying that right. I could be wrong. This is a sculpture done by none other than Michelangelo. It depicts the Blessed Mother Mary holding Jesus after he got taken down from the cross. You can see the nail holes in his hand. Again, it just shows the skill and talent of Michelangelo. He could do sculptures, he could do paintings, and this is arguably one of the most famous statues and sculptures in Vatican City. Really beautiful. The other one is St. Peter's Basilica. So it is kind of the main building in Vatican City. It like I said, it's built over the tomb of St. Peter, and it is home to all these artistic achievements. One thing about it is this dome shape you see was kind of revolutionary at the time. Obviously, the whole thing is a very beautiful building, but this dome shape was kind of revolutionary. And again, none other than Michelangelo had a big hand in helping design that dome shape. He obviously didn't do it all himself. That's impossible, but he did have a hand in creating it and helped build it. And unfortunately, he died before it was completed, so he never got to see it. But nonetheless, again, was there with the help of Michelangelo. And of course, it's right in the middle of Vatican City. So Michelangelo, the man himself, I've talked about him a lot. So a couple things that I'll touch on that I learned about him, and just good fact about his life, is he was actually born into a very poor family of aristocrats in 1475. So when my time period for this presentation started in 1500, he would have been 25, so nearing kind of the prime of his years, and he was definitely an adult for all the Renaissance. Another thing is he liked sculpting much more than painting. He considered himself a sculptor before a painter, and he took more joy in doing that. But I mean, tough life when you're excellent at both. So he definitely liked sculpting more. He also was a very, very vivid writer, and he loved to write in his free time when he wasn't sculpting giant statues or painting beautiful murals. He loved to write in his journal. He was also very critical of the popes, because back then the popes kind of played more of a role in terms of how society was ran in government. Obviously, it's not the case nowadays, but it was back then. And he was very critical of a lot of popes during his lifetime, which was kind of funny because he kind of worked for him, and he wasn't a fan of a lot of them. But anyway, I want to talk about Michelangelo because, again, to this day, he's considered one of the greatest artists of all time. His art is still seen by millions of tourists and people in Italy a year. And he was just he was on the forefront of that surge of artwork during this early modern era. He just was a very, very important figure back then. So kind of some key points in the lecture. Vatican City, still relevant today. It's still around today. I guess you could say the capital of the Catholic Church. It's home to tons of, being home to the Pope and the church officials. It's home to tons of artifacts and arts and architectures that were created during this Renaissance period that people still flock to see. St. Peter's Basilica, it was reconstructed, has that dome shape, houses a lot of these artworks that I've talked about, and it's kind of a Christian, plethora of artwork that people still come to see. And Michelangelo, like I just had talked about, timeless artist who was a master at his skill. It's just still to this day, people flock to see him. And actually, in the journal entry that I found for my bibliography, one of the quotes in there says he was able to make alive in dead stone. I mean, his sculptures were just so lifelike. They talk about the definition of the muscles and little details like the veins and the arms and the hands, and he was just so good at making his statues come to life. So that's my presentation about Vatican City. Hope you guys enjoyed it.